On behalf of the family, we'd like to welcome you to the memorial service for Leslie Goodwin. It's an opportunity for us to come and celebrate a life that has touched ours. Matthew, the 11th chapter, verse 28 says, "Come to me, all you who are weak and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest unto your souls." We're thankful that we have the opportunity to come together and support the family and let them know how much we valued Leslie in our lives, and just to confirm that we're here to support you and care about all that God's doing in your life. We'd like to have a prayer. Let's bow our heads together. God, we want to thank you that we can find the hope in you, and that we have opportunity to look for tomorrow knowing that you're there. Death may end a life, but it doesn't end a relationship. And we thank you for the father, the grandfather, the man who touched our lives. We just pray that through your Holy Spirit, you'll comfort each one of us with the hope of knowing that we have the assurance of a resurrection in the future. These things we pray in the precious name of Christ. Amen.
Well, I think our presence here this afternoon helps to highlight the fact that no life is lived outside the context of a place, a location, a time in history, and outside the lives of other people. So in doing Leslie's life sketch and thanking Pam and Paul for some really excellent notes about Leslie's life that I didn't know all about, I just wanted to draw some of those connections out to start off with. In doing Leslie's life sketch, I learned that he had spent, I knew at some level, but I found out for sure, that he had spent 60 years, roughly 2/3 of his life, in 2 different places. The last 25 here in Sonora. So I'd love to see those of you who knew Leslie from Sonora, raise your hand. Okay, that makes sense. There's a ton of people here from the Sonora years. And of course, some may overlap. The 35 years before that, Leslie and Virginia spent at Monterey Bay Academy. How many people know Leslie from those years? Again, lots of people and some overlapping. I'm not expecting to see nearly as many hands, but I'd sure like to know if there are any people who know Leslie from his time before that, whether it was in, oh, you were on the bus. Are you Larry Brunel? That's what I thought. You come into this story. Just wait, you'll see. So the years that I'm referring to before there are between Leslie's birth in San Francisco and his time at Armona Union Academy. So anyway, so now I know roughly where many of you got to know Leslie, again, proving the fact that none of us live our lives out of a context of relationships. So with that said, again, here's some other things. Most of us, our story does not start with our birth. It starts with our parents, at least 9 months before our birth. But in Leslie's case, it was much longer before that. Leslie's parents lived in England in the 1920s, and realizing that there were very few opportunities for upward mobility, decided that they needed to immigrate to the United States so that any future children they might have would have educational opportunities that would allow them to go to medical school. So they moved to the United States in 1924 and had children 3 years later. That's something. They arrived in San Francisco, and on August 22, 1927, Leslie's mother, Elizabeth, gave birth to Leslie. His mother was 4'10" tall. After delivering the baby, Dr. Brunel, he went to leave the delivery room, and the nurse said about 7 minutes later, "Wait, there's another one." So here we are in the 1927 with a 4-foot 10-inch mother giving birth to unanticipated twins, so a high-risk pregnancy and delivery in 1927 that turned out very well, obviously, and went on to set kind of the auspicious beginnings for Leslie and Norman. So the first 10 years of Leslie's life, and it's very hard not to say Leslie and Norman at every turn because they were so close, and because part of Leslie's identity from the moment he was born was not just being a son, but being a brother, and a twin brother at that. But the first 10 years of their lives were spent in San Francisco, where they started their early education. But in addition to immigrating with their mother and father their mother and father immigrating in 1924, they immigrated along with Betty, Elizabeth, Leslie's mother's parents, Jim and Sarah. Yeah, that's what I thought. So Jim and Sarah and Jones. And Jim, after living in the U.S. for a few years, was very homesick for England. And so he got his daughter, Leslie's mom, to convince her husband that it would be a good idea to go back to England for a one-year visit to kind of just feel better about being gone. So they did that in stages. Leonard left first to get back to England, and he sailed first so that he could get a job and find a place for them to all live. Once he got back to London, he was concerned about the possibility of war breaking out. Mind you, this was 1938, so pretty valid concerns. And told the family not to follow him right away. But that news did not deter them. And Elizabeth Goodwin, Leslie's mom, and Leslie and Norman's mom, her mother, Sarah, and the 10-year-old twins boarded a freighter and headed to England. Elizabeth's father, so Leslie's grandfather, Jim, stayed behind in San Francisco to close up the house and planned to follow shortly. So Leslie and Norman were on this a ship to England on their 11th birthday in August of 1938. And coincidentally, the captain of this ship had been the captain when Leonard had gone to England the previous journey, not a whole year before, but shortly before. While Leonard was on board, a passenger died unexpectedly, and Leonard had performed a burial service for this person. And the ship's captain was so appreciative of what Leonard had offered in terms of services to the family that he let Norman and Leslie have the run of the ship. So they thought ship life was great, and I can think that most of you who know Leslie can see where some other things that came later in life might have started. So the captain was, the ship's captain was again very good to the entire Goodwin family, and was very, showed them a great time, especially on their 11th birthday. Well, as we all know, looking back, what they didn't know looking forward was that World War II did break out. And the family was in England for this one-year visit. The war broke out. They had booked passage on a ship heading back to the U.S., but it was bombed while it was in the harbor. And it quickly became apparent that they were going to be stuck for a while in England and would not be heading back to the U.S. anytime soon. Very sadly, Jim, Leslie's and Norman's grandfather, was the one who had badly wanted to go back to England, never did make it to England because he was caught in a web of circumstances that didn't allow that, and he ended up dying before they made it back to the U.S. But once they did get back, the boys completed their elementary schooling in San Francisco, and at the age of 13, I told this story wrong. I'm sorry, Pam. Nobody made it back to the U.S. yet in my story. I'm sorry. The boys, the whole family was stuck in England, and the boys were forced to go to work at age 13. Everybody was forced to go to work because the war was coming. They went to work in the Ford Motor Company in Dagenham, where all kinds of vehicles were being built for the military. Elizabeth even had a job there. She was, as Pam said, a legit Rosie the Riveter, and I put in question mark Betty the Bolter. Betty being her nickname. Several times throughout the war, the family would move, only to learn after moving that their previous home had been bombed. So God was truly watching over the Goodwin family. This also comes out in Leslie's life, a very strong sense of God's leading and providence and provision in his life. During this time that they were everybody was working at the Ford Motor Company in England and the war had started, the twins were active in working at the American Red Cross on Sundays. Leslie would call in taxis for the troops who wanted a tour of London, and Norman kept the soldiers apprised of when they needed to catch the train back to where they were visiting from or where they were stationed. During this time that they were volunteering at the American Red Cross, Leslie became friends with Lady Adele Cavendish, who happened to be Fred Astaire's sister, and she was married, she was obviously American, married to Lord Charles Cavendish. By this time, Lord Cavendish had died, and Adele asked Leslie to be her date, 11-year-old or 14-year-old Leslie, to a Glenn Miller concert when he came to entertain the American troops. Leslie remembers that evening with great fondness. Unfortunately, it was the last performance that Glenn Miller and his orchestra ever gave, as the small plane that Glenn Miller left London in disappeared and was never found. Well, with the war in full force and Leslie and Norman getting older, they tried to register as aliens in England, hoping to avoid being forced into the British Army. They were worried about losing their dual citizenship, and when they made an attempt to join, to register as aliens, the notes I have say the bloke at the police station, so I can only imagine who wrote that, asked them where they were born. They told him San Francisco. He then asked where their parents were born, and when they answered Manchester, the officer asked, "Manchester, England?" And they said yes. Well, the officer replied, "If a cat has kittens in a pigsty, they are still kittens, not pigs." So the boys were going to be in the British military if they didn't do something, which they did. They went to the U.S. Embassy when they were 17, knowing that their conscription would be inevitable at 17 and a half if they didn't do something in the meantime. So they asked what they should do. They were told that they would need to join the American forces, and they signed up for the Merchant Marines. When they got word that their ship was ready to leave, they collected their final paycheck at 17 from the Ford Motor Company and boarded the ship, not knowing when they would see their parents again. So the trip to the United States, written in typical British understatement, was not uneventful. It was winter, so winter of 1944. It was icy cold and somewhat treacherous traveling through the North Atlantic. At one point, a heavy hatch cover fell on Leslie's foot, crushing his toe. The only doctor in the convoy was on another ship. The captain radioed this doctor asking what he should do to take care of this problem, and the doctor on the other ship basically walked the captain through the first aid medical procedures he needed to do to take care of his injured foot. And Leslie was not very reassured by the fact that the person working on his toe had only had first aid training. Not long after that, their convoy was torpedoed, and the alarm for all sailors to head out on deck was sounded, but Leslie was confined to his bunk with this foot injury. He rolled out of his bunk, crawled to the upper deck, and by the time he arrived there, the torpedo that had been heading straight for their ship had somehow dipped under their ship and hit the ship next to them. Again, very, very strong sense in Leslie's life that God was watching out for him and his twin brother. When Leslie and Norman got to New York, Leslie was still injured, and he was sent to the hospital to finish healing. The captain tried to talk Norman into staying on board, but you can already tell that that wasn't going to happen. There was no splitting these two up. Once Leslie had healed enough to be discharged, they headed to Youngstown, Ohio, to stay with an aunt and uncle. They were 17 and a half by this time and had had no schooling beyond the 8th grade. They enrolled in the Youngstown High School for the second semester of that school year, probably early 1945 by now. At the end of that semester, they were drafted into the U.S. Army and were first sent to Camp Crowder, Missouri, and then on to Fort Sam Houston to go to surgical tech school. Once the war ended, their parents returned to San Francisco. I had to find out when the war ended because I wasn't as good a student of Leslie Goodman's as I could have been. September 2, 1945. I'm happy to see these two history teachers right here in the front row, the two Tims. Thank you for nodding your head and letting me know that, yes, indeed, Wikipedia is correct. So the war has ended. Their parents are in San Francisco. Leslie and Norman have headed home to be with their parents and have had a little bit of high school, so a second semester of 1 year of first year of high school, and no other education beyond the 8th grade, and they head to PUC. No big deal. So they get to PUC and find it tough going in pre-med requirements. They were with most of the students they were attending school with had were older than they were, had more education than they did, and it was hard work. That many of the people they went to school with were also veterans. They could see that it was going to be a challenge to become doctors. Well, they persevered in their studies, wanting to meet their, especially father's, expectations. And while they were there, outside of school time, Leslie began teaching the junior Sabbath school class at the PUC church. One of the observers there told him that he was a natural-born teacher and that he should consider switching his major to education, and Leslie loved history and decided that he would love to become a history teacher and change his major. Well, as you can imagine, somebody who has a lifelong dream for their children to do one thing is not going to be super excited to find out they want to do something else. And as it was, and that was exactly the case, but it turned out to be, I think all of us would agree, exactly the right decision for Leslie. He was truly born to be a teacher. Norman, on the other hand, and I keep looking over here because Norman's children, Karen and Dwight, are here today, and this story is their story in so many ways. Norman held out a couple years longer before changing his major to theology. While attending PUC, Leslie noticed a pretty girl, my aunt, my mother's older sister, Virginia, who looked very interesting. That's probably not the only thing he thought. Unfortunately, she seemed to always have a tall, good-looking young man with her. After a while, Leslie didn't see that young man around, so he asked around to find out why. Well, he found out that her good-looking escort was actually her brother, Orlando, and that he had dropped out of school due to a health issue. Leslie wasted no time in asking Virginia out, and they were married in August of 1950. So, as many of you know, these couples who go on to lead very long and happy lives together, their names tend to take on a hyphenated, run-on kind of quality of Leslie and Virginia, Bob and Graceland. I can look at many other examples, Herb and Anita, to think of others. That is how the story of Les and Jenny, Leslie and Virginia, however you knew them. Uncle Leslie and Aunt Virginia came to be there in 1950, which continued on until 2018 at Virginia's passing. But they were married in August of 1950. They were actually married on August the 13th and were scheduled to be married originally 2 weeks later. But there was a chance that Leslie was going to be forced into the military, drafted yet a third time to serve in the military, and they decided the date up. So they actually got the wedding invitations before they were mailed and changed the date on the invitations to August 13 from August 27, and then mailed them out. And in the time in between that and when the wedding actually took place, Leslie went for his military medical exam, and you had to be examined by a panel of physicians, the first two of whom declared him perfectly fit for duty, and the third of whom had a vague recollection of knowing Leslie and said, "Now tell me what you're doing in your life." And he says, "Well, I'm going to be getting married in the next couple of weeks." And he said, "You know, I don't think we need you after all," and stamped his paperwork, and he was unfit for duty. Not in any kind of way except physical. So again, another sign to Leslie that God was definitely leading in his life. So as many of you know, Leslie and Virginia both graduated from Pacific Union College after their marriage. Virginia graduated in 1951, Leslie in 1952, and they headed south to Weslaco, Texas, where Leslie had a job. Actually, they both had jobs teaching at Valley Grande Academy in Weslaco. So Leslie taught history, English, and choir, and Virginia taught elementary school. Our cousin Sylvia, Pam and Paul's older sister, made her arrival there on May 9 of 1953. And about 2.5 years later, Paul and Pam arrived on Christmas Eve, 1955, not only born on Christmas Eve, but more twins. And their family was complete. It wasn't easily, and then more British understatement, it was not easy in those early years of teaching. 3 small children, 2 parents teaching school, far away from family. And the work and pay stopped in June, but the rent did not. The Goodwin family traveled back to California every summer so that Leslie could work to provide for his family. In 1957, Leslie got a call to teach at Armona Academy, where he taught the 7th and 8th grade and high school history. They lived in Corcoran. And people would say, "Now, why would you live in Corcoran if you're teaching in Armona?" Well, part of the deal in getting the job at Armona, Dr. Brunell knows, is that Leslie would drive the bus, get up early so he could drive a busload of students from Corcoran to Armona. He taught them all day, and then did the return trip with a bus full of students. I'm sure, Dr. Brunell, that you can attest that every single one of those students was always perfectly behaved and that the weather was never too hot or too cold on that bus. Having grown up in the Central Valley, I know that, what those bus rides were like at the beginning and into the school year. So after about 5 years in that area, the Armona Corcoran area, Leslie received a call to teach at Monterey Bay Academy. Virginia had gone back to teaching for a couple of years in Armona, having gotten her children and home life stabilized a little bit, but now they were both called, this time to Monterey Bay Academy, where I know my family and I thought that they definitely had gotten an upgrade at this time. It was so pretty there. Leslie was hired to teach Bible and history, and as Monterey Bay Academy grew, the need for more sections of history continued to grow, and eventually the Bible teaching requirement and part of his assignment was dropped. Virginia worked right next door to him. She was the librarian and German teacher. And Leslie was known for his storytelling. He had many personal stories from World War II that he wove into his classes. And Virginia and Leslie, as we all know, were very beloved teachers during their 35 years at MBA. Leslie was a favorite teacher for countless students who attended MBA through the years. He received many, many calls to other schools, but the hearts of Leslie and his family were firmly planted at MBA, and he turned them all down. Well, I got notes for this life sketch, and I just think that there needs to be a little bit of filling in of the details of how wonderful the years at Monterey Bay Academy were. Not only were the Goodwin children all in school close by at the time, not only were Leslie and Virginia gainfully and happily employed, and reciprocally so, but they had chickens in their yard. They had a Samoyed dog named Snowball. Not only at that time, not only that, but at the time, Monterey Bay Academy had a fully functioning dairy where you could actually go and watch cows getting milked twice a day. And a lot of really interesting students on campus, many of whom were dating each other, and there was no end of great people watching if you happened to be younger and thinking ahead to going to Monterey Bay Academy to entertain you. From their perspective, there was probably a little bit less enthrallment with that and a lot more cafeteria duty back in those days. Some set of teachers was always eating in the cafeteria. Some set of teachers was always supervising the outdoor spaces, and some set of teachers was present at every worship service that took place on weekdays, weekends, and of course, any Saturday night entertainment program. Teachers had a very full life, and there was a lot of expectation, especially during those years. I know that hasn't stopped altogether in boarding academy life, but it was particularly highly expected, and the enrollment had grown many, many times over at Monterey Bay Academy during the years they were there. Well, not only was Leslie busy teaching school, but during the summers he attended PUC so that he could earn his master's degree in history, and was successful in doing that, and his thesis reported on German U-boats during World War II and their involvement in it. He went on to take other graduate-level history class courses, never losing his love of history and learning, particularly, wait for it, maritime history. Leslie, during this time at Monterey Bay, also joined the Coast Guard Auxiliary in Santa Cruz, where he taught Coast Guard history to the flotilla. I don't think he probably enjoyed that at all. Leslie loved his time being a part of the Coast Guard Auxiliary and was always competing with his twin brother Norman to see who would have a higher rank. Leslie ended his time with the Coast Guard as a captain, Norman as a commander. Not all the times at Monterey Bay were happy. Very, very sadly, in October of 1973, Sylvia and her longtime boyfriend and classmate from Monterey Bay, were they also classmates at VHM? So longtime, lots of years of school. Kent Hansen and Sylvia came home to MBA at the beginning of their junior year at La Sierra College then, to announce that they were engaged and that they were going to be going to Japan the following school year as married student missionaries. The family had a really beautiful Sabbath together with Kent and his family. Kent's family lived in Soquel, right nearby. But on Sunday, as they were heading back to La Sierra, they were involved in a car accident, and Sylvia was killed instantly. Kent, while badly injured, was thankfully spared. And as you can imagine, this was a crushing blow to the family, all involved. Leslie took this loss especially hard. During the time that followed 1973 to the end of their time at Monterey Bay Academy in 1997, as I've alluded to earlier, Leslie and Virginia found found themselves busy in the official roles they had been hired for, in many other roles that they took on there, growing into touring with the Monterey Bay Academy West Winds Band, the elite band, which I guess maybe that started the tradition of the history teachers narrating stories that went along with the music that was being played. Leslie enjoyed very much, as a storyteller, sharing stories that had to do with the time in which the music was written, that had to do with the composer of the piece, anything that he could think of or find that would tie in the music to the times that it was being performed in and had been composed in. And they enjoyed that for many years. In 1997, deciding that it was time for retirement, Leslie and Brenda, I have also glossed over some marriages and births of grandchildren in here. So in the years between 1973 and 1997, when the Goodwins left Monterey Bay Academy, they gained some in-law children, and they gained 5 grandchildren, who, of course, were a very meaningful, happy, and proud part of Leslie's life. Leslie became a grandfather in April of 1983 with the birth of Justin, his oldest of 5 grandchildren. Leslie became a great-grandfather some years later here in Sonora in March of 2016. June of 2016. Yep. With the birth of his first great-grandchild, he now has 5. But deciding that it was time for retirement and wanting to be closer to family, Leslie and Virginia found this next part of their life that became home very quickly. Those who knew Leslie well and knew how much he loved teaching were very concerned that retirement would leave him, wait for it, rudderless. I did not make this up, somebody else did. It was a good one. This, as you know, did not prove to be true. Leslie was not one to be idle. Leslie quickly wove himself into any part of life in which he found himself, and he found many hobbies to keep him busy. Leslie and Virginia were both very active in prison ministries. They were active in Golden Fellowship, a home Bible study group at the Harris's home, and both held a number of church offices, including Leslie teaching an adult Sabbath school class. I know, too, that with a home with a couple of acres attached to it, there was a lot of work to do there. So very busy years, very happy years, very content years, being very close to one of their children and family, grandchildren right across the driveway, and another set not too many hours away by car. One of the great sadnesses of Leslie's life in Sonora was when his hearing became so impaired that he had to stop teaching. Always very active and loved being active. Leslie, along with Jim Harris, had also started the Veterans Recognition events that the church continues to put on here every year. Back to Leslie and Norman. Leslie and Norman remained close as always from birth until the time that they turned 80, or sometime into their 85th year. They wrote to each other every single day. Sometimes they even played Battleship by mail. I only found out this weekend that you could play Battleship without putting little pegs in a board that came in a box game set. And sometime into their 85th year, Norman stopped writing to Leslie. Leslie could not understand why. About 6 months after the letter stopped coming, Norman's wife, Joanne, called Pam to let her know that Norman had passed away. When Pam told Leslie the news, he was not surprised at all. He had already lost his brother when the letters had stopped. In October of 2018, Virginia passed away, as many of you know. This was another hard loss for Leslie, and he was very brave and stoic about it and planned to continue living alone in their home. But this became increasingly clear that it was not going to be the best for him. Honestly, being such a social person as he was, Pam, I have to think that he maybe was a little more capable than he let on, just to get more people to come live with him. None of that would surprise me. Pam, Heather, and Jamie moved in to help care for him. Of course, there were continued visits from his Southern California family. And during the last year and a half of his life, in addition to his family members who cared for him, he had a wonderful group of caregivers during the day when Pam and Heather were at work. He always had a very affirming and grateful personality, a genuine interest in people, and though he struggled with short-term memory loss getting into this part of his life, he never lost his zest for life, nor his ability to affirm and appreciate others. He adored his caregivers, and they adored him. In fact, more than one of them was quoted as saying they'd never had somebody as special as Leslie and were confident that they never would to take care of. Leslie also enjoyed spending time with his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They brought so much joy, and I will say, without a shadow of a doubt, anybody who knows Leslie knew pride to his life. Leslie is survived by his son, Paul, and his wife, Cindy. Paul's sons, Justin and Devin, their wives, Sonia and Martha. Sonia and Justin's grandchildren, Edison, Miles, and Lily, and Devin and Martha's children, Jack and Paige. Also survived by Pam, her children, Jonathan and his wife, Shelley, their children, Finn and Tegan, Heather and her husband as of last August, Brad, and by Jamie. We all look forward to seeing Leslie sometime, hopefully sooner than later.
Good afternoon. Those pictures said it all, didn't it? And I was reminded as watching and hearing the sniffles that joy and sorrow commingle. We cry on one hand because the person that's no longer among us brought us so much joy, and we cry because we miss them. But memories are what hold us while we await that resurrection morning. And I so appreciated the life sketch that Jill brought because it enlarged my picture of Mr. Goodwin. I heard of Mr. Goodwin before I ever met Mr. Goodwin because he was my son's history teacher. How many of you were either parents of children who are at Monterey or actually sat in his classroom? And I see you raise your hands. Look at this. You need to look around. So when he came, he was no stranger. I didn't know him personally because I never sat in his classroom, but I heard about Mr. Goodwin. And as a parent who sends her child away from home, I soon learned that Monterey Bay Academy was a place where they treated our kids like family. And Leslie and Virginia were part of what made that campus like family, and I knew they were safe because they just opened their homes and their hearts to the kids. It was beautiful. And he was no less the same way when he came here to Sonora, and I was privileged to know him and his family for many years. Beautiful people. But now it's time for you to share some of your memories that you have, your own personal memories. We've set aside a few minutes, and we have a couple of mics. And if you wouldn't mind, as you share, just say your name and your relationship to Mr. Goodwin, and share your special memory. So we've got somebody that's got the mic right there. Has been eager. Go ahead.
Right. Good afternoon. My name's Tim Kubrock. I'm from Monterey Bay Academy, and I am here representing, you might say that we have some history between Mr. Goodwin and then Mr. Z and myself. We have been the history teachers at MBA since 1962. Wow. But even between the time Mr. Z and I have between us, we still haven't caught up to Mr. Goodwin, as I called him, Commander Goodwin, my friend. He was truly a game changer. Mr. Goodwin, when I think of him, you know, he was part of the MBA royalty. There were some long-timers at MBA, and I saw so many of you raised your hands that you know exactly better than I what I'm talking about. But Commander Goodwin, when I came to MBA in 1997, he was the best substitute teacher I ever had. When I went anywhere, Mr. Goodwin would come down, and he was the best substitute teacher I ever had. There's some words that come to mind when I think of him. One of those words would be respect. Mr. Goodwin not only treated people with respect, he was someone who, for his aura, you respected him as well. Mr. Goodwin, other words would be humor. You know, I could just hear him and see that twinkle in his eye as he cracks a joke. Honor. And of course, he was a master storyteller. I could almost hear him telling the story of the 4 chaplains. I'm sure most of you remember the story as they went down with the ship. On Veterans Day, of course, Mr. Goodwin, how many of you remember the fact that freedom is not free, it comes with a price? And he would remind us of that as he came and shared in Veterans Day programs with our students at MBA and other places, and the way he treated those who had served and treated them with respect and gave out these amazing medallions. But Mr. Goodwin, although he was small in stature, that was the only thing that he was small, and he left a huge legacy behind. So to all of you, Pam and Paul and the Goodwin family, I can someday just see Jesus saying to him and to Virginia, well done, thou good and faithful servant. What a well-lived life.
Thank you. Who else would like to share? Just raise your hand and they'll come to you.
Hi, my name
name is Sandy Van Zant, and I was one of Leslie's caregivers for a very short time, just for a few months, but those few months were monumental. First time I met Leslie, his caregivers, June and Carla, were there, and you could feel the love between the three of them. And then when I met Pam, the love that she had for her father and the love that he had for her, I mean, you could feel it in the room. It was palpable. I could feel it in my heart. It was there every time. And because of the love I had for my own dad, I just admired that so much. But when I met Leslie, the first thing I said to him was, "How are you, Leslie?" And of course he said, "I'm Leslie." And that was his favorite thing to say every morning when I'd go to see him. One of the most gracious men everything I did, the least little thing, whether it was putting cinnamon on his French toast or giving him a sip of water, he was so grateful for everything. And that will always stay with me. He just would say thank you, and the wink in his eye will stay with me. And he would talk about Norman, of course, and he said there were times when he felt Norman was just sitting there waiting for him, and Virginia, that they were waiting for him, and he knew when the time would be right that he would see them again. And he said it was such positivity and no regrets, and looking forward to spending the rest of eternity with them. And I absolutely believe that he's with them now. I know that he is with them, and how lucky they are, and how lucky we are, and how so incredibly grateful I am that the short time I got to spend time with this man who I know has made me a better person. So thank you, Pam and family, for letting me sit here and talk about your dad, your granddad, and friends of his. It's an honor. It's an absolute honor.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
My name is Gary Caldwell.
Uh-oh, maybe we need to switch mics.
Hello? Hi, my name's Gary Caldwell, and Leslie, there's another little legacy for Leslie, and that is, after Virginia died, Leslie was very lonely. And Pam put together, she started with Tim and Wayne, and put together a men's group to keep Leslie company and to give him some men time. As of right now, that group has grown to, we have, I think, 60-some people on that list.
Wow.
And Leslie would be very honored to know that so many people have pulled together, and it's because of Pam putting this together for Leslie. And we have a men's group that meets weekly and share a devotional together and men time together, and it is very bonding for the men. When COVID came, it kind of put a stop to things for a while, and Leslie never quite made it back after COVID to join the men's group. But what I remember from Leslie and the group is every time he would talk about Virginia, and he would talk about how he missed her, but that he knew that when his time came, that he would be reunited at the resurrection with Virginia, and that they would be able to see Jesus together. And that was his whole hope. And just wanted to let you know that Leslie's legacy is still going forward with the men's group.
Thank you for sharing that backstory, Gary, to this men's group. What a legacy.
My name
Uh-oh.
My name is
There you go.
Rose Montoya, but it was Schonert when I was a 13-year-old freshman at MBA. We all met, my classmates and I met Mr. Goodwin at MBA, and I was a shy little German girl, and he just seemed to delight in making me blush. And whenever I was in class, he'd say something and I would blush, and he just got that twinkle, like you said, in his eye.
Yes.
And he made me feel very special. And in fact, I was fortunate enough to be his reader, it's like a secretary, in the history department for 3 of the 4 years I was at MBA. So we had a very special relationship.
For sure.
He and Virginia just took me into their home and their hearts, and he was like a surrogate dad to me. And in fact, my own dad, he invited him to join the Coast Guard Auxiliary in Santa Cruz, and so my father got a lot of pleasure out of that. But Leslie, Mr. Goodwin, I have a hard time calling him Leslie after all these years, he's still Mr. Goodwin, was the epitome of Jesus' love.
Mm-hmm.
He showed me about how God loves us so much, and I can hardly wait to see him in
Yes.
heaven.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Leslie Schmidt. Some of you know me by name because I don't always get to church because I have some health issues and I sleep in a lot, but my husband Gary's playing organ. We've been privileged to live at Sonora for 2 years now. We spent a lot of time at Monterey Bay Academy. We moved there in 1992, and Virginia and Leslie took us under their wings, mentored us, loved us. Besides Paul, with the middle name Leslie, I'm the other Leslie. So our joke was at MBA, I'm the other Leslie. I'm the Leslie in the dress and the makeup, and he was the Leslie in the suit and the tie. So that was our joke. When the Goodwins were at MBA, they were just the sweetest, most wonderful people, loved everybody. Leslie was the same age as my dad, so he was like a father to me, but we also became really good friends. And we did a lot of things together, spent a lot of time with them before they moved here to Sonora. We're privileged to be here in Sonora because when we were at MBA, I always said, and this is true, the best people came from Sonora and brought their kids to MBA. And now we're privileged to be here, and because of our association with them at MBA, we know a lot of the people here already, so it was very nice to be able to move here to retire. The last year, Pam asked us, sometimes Gary and I, to come watch Leslie, sit with him, so that she and Heather could have a break. One of the pictures, thank you, Pam, the last picture of him with the beard and the goatee, he looks so cute. His thumbs up. But I want to share, his stories. Nobody has said this yet, so I'll share. I'm sure the family's heard it. Leslie said, one of his great stories, he said, my angel. He said, my personal angel. And this was Leslie talking. He said, my personal angel came to me and told me not to be afraid of dying. He said, my angel told me I would be in heaven with Jesus, and the Goodwin family would all be there. So I want you guys to know that at the last, Leslie was saying. So he wanted you to be reassured that you'd all be there with him. So I want you all to remember, Leslie said his personal angel. So there is a God in heaven, and he wants us all to be there with he and Virginia.
Thank you so much.
I'm Frances McAllister. My last name was Israel, and I went to Monterey Bay Academy. I went there in '67, beginning of my sophomore year. One of the years, or several of the years, the Goodwins were class sponsors, and they were good sponsors. And I had him for at least history class. I don't remember if I had him for a Bible class or not, but they were always humorous. And before I went to Monterey Bay Academy, I knew Sylvia and Pam and Paul at the DHM in Santa Cruz. And I was first on the bus, and then one of the last stops was at Monterey Bay Academy where they got on the bus. So I've known them since about 1962 or 63, when, I think it was 1963 when my folks moved to Watsonville. So I've known them for many years, and every time I go to alumni, when they were going to alumni, able to go to alumni, I'd say hi to him, so we'll miss him.
Thank you so much. Lots of memories.
My name is Gerald Smiley. Leslie in Virginia moved right next door, or across the street from where I live at, and I got to meet my brother veteran then, and it was an honor and a privilege to get to know him. We went to Bible school, Bible study at Virginia Harris' house, and it was an honor to get to know him in Virginia really well. So, and he has an awesome family. I got to get to meet them too, and they're very awesome family, and I just praise you guys for being strong during the time of this period, and always praying for you.
Thank you.
My name is Fred Webb. I don't remember the first time I met Mr. Goodwin or Leslie. About 15 years ago, I was visiting in their home when Virginia brought out their wedding book. My name was there, and attended their wedding. I was about 9 years old. In later years, I also worked at Monterey Bay Academy, and well, 3 stories, short, hopefully. It had been 10 years, our youngest was 10 years old, when we found out that Arlene was pregnant again. So I made arrangements with the principal to make an announcement at faculty meeting. Well, I happened to be sitting next to Leslie, and when Harvey Voth said I had an announcement, he leaned over and says, I suppose you're going to say you're pregnant. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, Terry's due in June 16. Also, I, as a faculty member, was asked to come and help with the band, play a tuba, because they didn't have enough tubas. So I traveled with the band, and I think we were at Glendale Academy when Leslie looked back at the group and he told the students, you know, some of our students at MBA take a long time to get through. See that old gray-haired man in the back? But probably the best thing that I remember of Leslie is his work with mission boats. He loved to provide mission boats for different places in the mission field. And he provided several for us in the Philippines, which I was very thankful for. One of them, by the way, was named the Lady Sylvia. Another one was the Lady Karen. So we had these mission boats to remember our friends here in California.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tim Zikoski, and I graduated from South Lancaster Academy in Massachusetts. I'd heard of Monterey Bay Academy. I thought it was a myth. It was so exotic and so cool. Well, this August, I'm going to be going into the classroom where Leslie Goodwin taught, and I'm going to be teaching for the 20th year there. And I want to talk about Mr. Goodwin's legacy. There's a picture and a plaque on my wall that has Mr. Goodwin's picture. And every year, this April, I will be giving an award to a student who represents excellence in history. And it's his legacy. But I think an even bigger legacy, I knew Pam and Paul in college. In fact, we shared a house a duplex on Court Place. But the biggest legacy is I had the privilege of teaching 2 of Mr. Goodwin's grandkids, Heather and Jamie. And what they have and what they will be doing for the world continues Mr. Goodwin's legacy.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Z.
I'm Laura Lynn Weilman at that time. We came as readers in his office, and I followed Rosie and Riney and Carol. I don't know, how many readers are there here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? All the girls. He got us girls. And I think he tried to keep me busy. He had me actually type 2 full books one time. He wanted these copies, and in those days there were really no copier. It was a Xerox machine or something. So he had me, I learned how to type that year. Anyway, we're glad to be here, and they loved us so much, and actually became mom and dad to me. I just called them mom and dad the rest of my life. And so this has been very moving to me to see this and be with Pam and Paul again, my brother and sister. And so I'm looking forward to seeing them again. But one thing that really impressed me with their ministry was his love of missions, like Fred mentioned. Our class, 1970, he convinced us as our class sponsor, he encouraged us to use as our class gift a mission somewhere. So we got our money together and we built a school over in Menyamya, I think it's called, over in New Guinea. And I've been trying to find out what's been happening, but I don't hear anything from him, so I'm assuming it's still going. But going through my mom's stuff, my mom's 94 now, just a year younger, and we've been going through all her stuff, and here we came across a little, that's how I know the name of the church again, because she had a clipping of it. Anyway, looking forward to heaven and all the mission results of all of their efforts, and so many mission. It became part of a thing at MBA. Everybody was doing, everybody every year was raising money for missions through his leadership. So thank you.
Thank you.
I was not expecting such an introduction as earlier. I'm Larry Brunel, and this makes me feel really young that I must have known him at least 65 years ago, and Pam and their family. They lived a few blocks down the road from us in Corcoran. The only notoriety of Corcoran now is the prison that's out there, but that wasn't there then. Anyhow, indeed, I rode in Mr. Goodwin's bus every day of the school year. Well, my total school time was 11 years. It took me a long time to get through, too. But anyway, the two incidents that I remember with Mr. Goodwin. I was his student in 7th and 8th grade, and he was generally a quiet man. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't make noise or whatever, but when the class got really rowdy, and I'm sure I was adding the decibel level of noise in the class there, he had this stick on his desk of some kind, and he would just whack that thing on the desk really loud, and all of a sudden everybody would get the attention and say, now we can begin class and move on to other things. Then the other thing that was really neat for us farm kids out in Corcoran and Armona, our 8th grade ditch day to San Francisco. Now, I know when kids now, they go to Europe or they go to Hawaii or something, but this was San Francisco, wow. And we got to stay in a hotel about, 16 floors up and look out the windows and drop things and all kinds of stuff. But anyway, Leslie liked to turn on his English accent. He could turn it on or off at will. And there happened to be a British battleship in the port in San Francisco the days that we were there. So he had his sailor cap on, you know, and he says, "Aye, matey, what part of England are you from?" You know, and that just opened the door, and several of us guys got to go on the ship and tour the whole ship, and, you know, they just had a great time. We had a great time. So he indeed was a wonderful teacher and one of my favorites, and our time goes back a little ways, so thank you.
Thank you.
For those of you that don't know me, I'm Carla. I started to hold it up closer. Thank you. Well, I don't know. I don't do these things very often. Anyway, I started taking care of Leslie in 2020. I immediately fell for this man, vice versa. Some of the things that he would say was, you know, when he'd make his little fist and say, "When the Goodwin family is strong in the church, then the resurrection morning will come." He used to tell me that on a regular basis. And I used to say, "Gosh, you know, Leslie, you're so confident. I just admire that of you." And he said, "Well, I just know what's going to happen, and I'm going to be happy to see everybody." So that touched me very much. The other thing I can say about Leslie is he loved to have fun. He loved shift change. He loved to see the girls come in and out taking care of him. He loved Pam coming home at 5 o'clock, and he really loved Brad. I don't know what that was, but he really loves Brad. Anyway, Mr. Goodwin was just the light of my life for the time that I took care of him. I've been caregiving for people for over 30 years, and indeed, you come across an individual and a family like this once in a lifetime. I have been blessed with more than one of those experiences, Marigold. And I thank you very much. I love you guys, and I love Leslie. One last thing. The first 2 days that I was there taking care of Leslie, he said to me, "You know, when I make it to heaven, when we go to heaven, I hope we're on the same street so that we can see each other." Yeah. Which, obviously, I fell in love with him right there. And then I said to him a couple of weeks later, I said, "You know what, Les? I'm going to take that one step further. I hope we're right across the street so we can wave at each other every morning." And we'd laugh about that every morning. There's a bazillion stories, and his love for you guys was just, there's not even a word. He loved you guys so much, it was just something you just knew. And like Sandy said, you felt it when you were in the room with him. He's a great man, and I wish I would have known him longer. Just going to tell you right now that he did ask me to marry him. And I threw my wedding rings down and said, absolutely yes, 1,000 times yes. So I miss him a great deal. And this is definitely a life well lived, seeing all of the people here. And I will continue my trek with my family. So thank you very much for letting me share.
Thank you for sharing. Oh, we have time for a few more.
I was one of those kids from Sonora who got to be in class with Pam and Paul. And, you know, leaving Sonora, you kind of worried about leaving home and all that. But Mr. Goodwin and Virginia were our class sponsors, and they made us feel so much at home. It was awesome. I loved his stories. The one thing that he did say that I had to question was my first day in his class. He said, "You look just like a student I had last year." And I stopped right there. He said, and I was just shocked that I looked just like a student. And I didn't know what to think of that. I had long brown hair, and but it was a very good experience at MBA, and he was a big part of it.
Thank you. Got somebody in the back?
My name's Jay Kettleson. I'm presently the vice principal for Monterey Bay Academy. 50 years ago, I walked into my sophomore history class, and to say it was a life-changing event is, well, it was a life-changing event. Leslie Goodwin was simply the most impactful educator in my entire life. We got more practical lessons in religion than we would out of any church service or any theologically driven Bible class. We learned about life. We learned that we might be having a bad day, but we didn't live in London during the Blitz either. So he taught us about perspective. His sense of humor was fantastic. Yes, he was a captain in the Coast Guard. His brother was a commander, but Jay Schock and my buddies, we all addressed him as Admiral. He seemed to enjoy that immensely. One quick story that I always remember. It was about 10 minutes before class was out, and one of our classmates in U.S. history had fallen asleep. And he simply says, and he let us all quietly walk out of the classroom, hold the doors open so we could see in when the bell rang, and the one guy woke up in the classroom by himself, totally astounded. But Goodwin, he had a great sense of humor. He had compassion in people. He was, in our opinion, my generation, he was the fundraiser behind building the Monterey Bay Academy Church that we presently enjoy. And he was one of the only teachers that let me sit next to this girl, and I've been sitting next to her for 46 years now, so thank you. Thank you, Leslie.
Oh, thank you.
I'm Scott Henning, and my wife Tammy and I were students of his at MBA, and we've actually probably known him since 1977. Can't believe it's been that many years, but have hundreds of good memories about him. He was class sponsors and just made everything fun, and he was always a tease and had a lot of fun times. But I have two distinct memories of Leslie, and one had to do with the mission boats that Fred was talking about. I remember one time at an alumni reunion, he was raising money for those, and he would come out and he'd make an impassioned plea, how many thousands can we raise? And he was going to ring that church bell once for every $1,000, and he would come out and he would go back and he'd ring the bell again. I don't know if anybody else remembers that, but it made a big impact on me, and I remember thinking, wow, that guy is really a good fundraiser, you know. But the other really strong memory I have of him was him making a very sincere and impassioned plea that all alumni meet at the west gate of heaven.
Oh.
I don't know if anybody else remembers that, but he has a plan. All the MBA alumni are going to meet at that gate.
Beautiful. Thank you, Scott. Okay, we've got time for a couple more. We've got...
Hey, I'm Donna Larson.
Here we go.
Donna Schumann at MBA. And I see my co-partner of being the first reader for Mr. Goodwin sitting on the other side of the aisle there, Carol. I knew Mr. Goodwin before Mr. Goodwin. It was Leslie to me and Virginia. I had known Virginia my entire life. And seeing the pictures of Adolph and Leah Knittel, Grandma and Grandpa Knittel with their families today just touched my heart. But I have to think in my mind about what made me a better person being in Mr. Goodwin's class and working for him. And what I take out of that is that my ethics for working in a business office became stronger and gave me the first fortitude to really step out, to be able to work in a business office. The other thing I remember, this little story, just tiny, somebody came in and called one of his little models a boat. Oh, no, you don't say boat to Mr. Goodwin. Oh, my goodness, for 30 minutes we talked about how it was a ship and never call it a boat again. I want to thank the families and the members for allowing your folks and your grandparents to be part of my life, all my entire life. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We've got somebody in the back. We'll get to you.
Well, I've been listening to everybody tell about Mr. Goodwin in school. My name is Don Crisp. I'm one of the members here at the church. But we had a Bible study up here in Dorothy Harris's house every Monday night until the pandemic, and Leslie was always there. Pam or one of the kids would bring him, and he was the life of our meeting. He had stories to tell us, and I've heard you tell some of them, and we've heard them all. But most of all, what impressed me about him is his faithfulness. His faithfulness not only to his wife, who was no longer with him, but Virginia used to play the piano for us until she passed. Leslie still kept coming. We'd make sure he got home, and as he began to slow down, and he knew he was failing, he always told us every night, "You guys are the ones keeping me alive." We were blessed by his presence. I'm a class of 54 at MBA. I was there before Leslie was, I believe. I don't remember him, in other words, but I wish I would have been one of his students. But he's got a blessed family to carry on, and you guys got a lot of memories, and I have a few. So it's been a blessing to know Leslie.
Thank you so much, Don.
Good afternoon. I'm a nobody. Actually, I was somebody to Mr. Goodwin. He was my bud. When I went to Monterey Bay Academy, he was my teacher. I went there 4 years. And we weren't that close. After I got out of the Army, we got a little closer. When I was at Monterey Bay Academy, every Saturday morning, we'd have a crop duster fly next door to the grounds of Monterey Bay Academy and crop dust, and that's what I wanted to do. So my question was to Mr. Goodwin, why do I need history? Why do I need Bible? And you know, as a professional man, it actually satisfied my need to know why. He gave me a straight answer, because he said, you're going to be a smart crop duster. When I came to the United States from Africa, my folks were missionaries, and I kept getting bounced down grades, 2 grades. So I was 19, going on 20 when I was at Monterey Bay Academy. One of the things that was plaguing Monterey Bay Academy was Mr. Jorgensen, which was the principal, was getting letters from the Army wanting to know exact date I was graduating. And so Mr. Goodwin, you know, he kind of would encourage me about, you know, behaving myself and all that. And my senior year, they told me, before you graduate, you have to take Bible class again, 1 semester. And I kind of wondered, why do I have to take, well, he had failed me and didn't tell me. And what had happened is I had a roommate that, you know, didn't study his Bible, I guess. But anyway, he had these cheat notes. And when Mr. Goodwin gave the exams, he'd leave the room. And I happened to see Mr. Goodwin walking down the hall, and I told my roommate that sat right next door to me, the chair next to me, I said, Mr. Goodwin's coming. And when I did that, I was leaning over, and when Mr. Goodwin came in, as my roommate was discarding all these cheat sheets. Well, that's why I failed. And then later on that semester, Mr. Goodwin says, we need to go to the principal's office. I go, what did I do now? And what had happened was the principal of the school got another letter, and they thought Monterey Bay Academy was failing me to keep me out of the Army.
Oh.
And so I saw the letter, and Mr. Goodwin testified that, you know what, he had to take that semester class again because he did cheat. I never did have the opportunity to tell Mr. Goodwin that I never did cheated in class. You know what I mean? But, you know, when you're young, my folks, you know, their idea was children lie, adults tell the truth. As we get older, we realize, wow, That's not true. The other thing was I thought I was going to marry this one gal when I was in the Army, and got one of those Dear John letters, and it really tore me up. And so I just left basically the denomination. I actually left my family, didn't associate with anybody that knew me from the past. And as life, I got one of those gung-ho things. I was going to be a Ranger, Green Beret. I ended up being an 82nd paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne. But the thing was, they were taking so many medics into Vietnam that after a while, word got out that I was killed in Vietnam. And when I got out of the service in 1971, I showed up at alumni. And everybody's looking at me like, you're supposed to be dead. And I'm here. But anyway, I could go on. Sorry. I could go on, but as the years went by, Mr. Goodwin was really a true friend. We had long talks at camp meeting, you know, and we'd talk about this and talk about that. And I don't see the young lady now, but I recognized her. Pam. I'm the guy that, when they got married, I had my gangster car out there, and I drove down to Monterey Bay Academy. Oh, this is the husband. He didn't have a beard then. Anyway, how you doing, Paul?
Thank you. These are beautiful memories, and we do have time for maybe, what, Pam? One or two more. Okay, I see somebody's got the mic.
I've been toying with whether I should tell this story or not. History was by far my least favorite class. I did not like learning about wars and their dates and trying to remember them all. Wars to me just was too much stress to even think about. In my sophomore year, I was a 4-year student at MBA, so I had German from Mrs. Goodwin. I took it hoping that I could speak at least one of the many languages my grandma did, but she passed away before I finished the class. All I can remember is "Sie ist sehr krank." She's very sick. Mr. Goodwin tried his best to teach me history, but in my sophomore year, a boy came to Monterey Bay Academy, and it turns out that his dad and my dad had been roommates at Oshawa Missionary College in Ontario, Canada. So we thought it was destiny that we met each other, and we ended up working at the same place. And we were out in the big field there where there's a church now, but there wasn't a church then. And we were pushing each other down and tripping each other on our way to on our way to work. And Mr. Goodwin had his class stand up and look out the window, and he gave them permission to vote on whether we were holding hands or not. And whether we should be put on social. And so the class voted yes. So I got 2 weeks of social for that.
Oh, dear. Okay, are we good? These are great memories, and I don't want the memory sharing to stop. This is so precious. It helps our hearts to heal. And we've got a lot of time for informal socially as we share some food and refreshments following this more formal part of this service. But thank you so much for bringing great memories to the family. This is a legacy he's left. So as we continue on, just want to express my gratitude for all of us and from the family.
Well, on behalf of the family, Paul and Pam and kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, I just want to thank you all for coming to celebrate Leslie's life. And the fact that there's so many of you here, and you see it when you stand up here, really speaks to a life well lived, and what an inspiration he was, right? And this is even for someone that passed away back in January. Leslie was my uncle, and Virginia and my father, Eugene, are siblings. Back in March, when I told my dad, who's 88 years old, doing with the last of those siblings left, I said, the service has been set for June. And my dad has a little wit to him, for those of you who know him, and he said, well, the Lord might be here by then. And we might have had enough stories that the Lord might have been here before I got up to speak, really. So we've had a good time. And then, of course, there's the pictures. I miss my uncle, miss Leslie, miss Virginia. And you see them change over the years. But you can't help but look at those pictures and wonder about Paul. I mean, there was like Beach Boy Paul, the kind of the Mick Jagger look Paul, the debonair Paul. I don't know. He changed all the time. Still does during those years. The rest of us just have to kind of live up to that. Back in January, when I did hear that Leslie had passed away, of course, for someone who's ailing and having caregivers under hospice, it's not necessarily a surprise. And there's a part of us all with 90 plus years of life, we say, you know, he's asleep in Jesus and the pain and suffering is gone, and that's okay. And we should be able to say that. That's okay. He was certain about where he was going. But he's also missed during that time, too. And I know from losing one of my parents that there's, you get home from a trip or something and you'd want to call your mom and dad and say, tell what happened, how the trip went. And they're not there for that. You miss them. I thought about Leslie with family news. Grandson Jonathan, announced that he's going to be an English teacher, Puget Sound Academy in Seattle area, following his grandfather's footsteps. And he was immensely proud of all of you guys over here. But I got to think there's something got to be special about someone following in his footsteps because he knows the influence you can have. So congratulations to all of you, Jonathan especially. When I think about Leslie, kind of the quintessential Leslie Goodwin that I think of growing up, he seemed like he was always in a coat and tie, right? And the tie was always this kind of regimental stripe because there was this English heritage about it. And the tie I'm wearing today, I wore at some family event at one point. And I remember he came up and he said, that looks like a very English tie. And it's that kind of regimental, more formal stripes. He usually wore a blazer. And it wasn't just a blazer, and it wasn't just a blue blazer, but it was a navy blue blazer, right, that he wore. And then in later years, it was, some of the cousins have said in feedback to me, the Hawaiian shirts he would wear. And there was one particular bright pink, hot pink Hawaiian shirt. And Pam was telling me that Leslie would say that I get a lot of comments about this shirt. And she had to point out that, getting a lot of comments doesn't mean it's the right shirt. But he was getting a lot of comments about that shirt. But many wonderful memories of him. And they're reminders to us of the importance of his life and the legacy of his life. So in talking today, I want to talk about his legacy, and I also want to bring out some scriptures. And I'd like to start with one particular scripture, Psalms 23. It's one that many of you, I'm sure, memorized during your youth. And I'm going to say it from the King James Version. And I would invite you, as you remember it, to repeat it right along with me. Okay? Here we go. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Do you ever think when you read that, or if you go reread it after today, that that chapter of Psalms, one of the most favorite chapters for many religious groups, really speaks to a journey of your life? There are times in our lives where God is with us. He leads us besides the still waters, green pastures. But then also, there's the valley of the shadow of death. I remember 1973, my family being greeted at the door at Monterey Bay Academy with Leslie, tears running down his face. Just the profound loss of Sylvie's death. I know the connection between brothers, twin brothers especially, and the daily story writing to Norman. That must have been tough. And Virginia, of course. I think a lot of us guys kind of figure, the statistics, we get to go first. We don't have to go through that. But that didn't happen in this case. And then there's death, the shadow of death of, your own mortality, isn't it? When you know that you're not going to be here forever and dealing with that. This psalm really speaks to that, and it ends up with a single statement: I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Something to remember. I want to talk about some key things Leslie taught me as his nephew, and I think from the stories I heard today, taught you that I want us to remember today. I heard some years back a writer, Salman Rushdie, speak, and he says, knowing stories is the proof of belonging. Knowing stories is the proof of belonging. So Leslie's story of his life that Jill so well stated today, that's the belonging, the importance of family. That's why we have this service not on, February 1, but in June, so the family could be here. Stories are important. Leslie loved the stories. He also knew the story of Virginia. And you think about the odds of these two getting together and meeting at PUC. From what you heard about Leslie's story, well, Virginia, her grandparents were born in Crimea and made this journey longer than the Oregon Trail to get to the Dakotas and then Coeur d'Alene, and then a ride with the two Knittel brothers and their kids in 1934 in November, with the kids in the back of the pickup, all the way from Coeur d'Alene to Lodi, and then eventually a farm in Madera. What a story. The stories were important to Leslie's. They made him a great history teacher, right? And writing those letters to Norman, I was glad Jill brought that up, because I remember one day coming up to him at a reunion, and this was a day when you could have called Norman on the phone. It would have been that easy, right? Which is what I would have said to do. But he's writing the letter to Norman. Very important, writing down the stories. Stories are important. Another one, Leslie was inquisitive. And if you know him, it wasn't about him ever. I remember at family reunion, and all of us nieces and nephews being around, and from our youngest days until where we are today, Leslie would make a round to everyone before the end of the day and ask questions. How are you doing? What's important to you? What's your favorite subject in school? And as we got older, It got to bigger things. Occasionally he would even bring up politics, I remember, not in the polarization way we do it today, but in a very appropriate manner. So good at finding out things about you. And he did it not because it was a method just to talk, it was because he was genuinely interested. Another reason why he was a great history teacher, right? Leslie was a wonderful mentor to students. That just goes without saying. Often in my career in life, I run into people. In fact, just yesterday we were meeting with some people in Chico, and I knew two of them went to Monterey Bay Academy. And immediately when you say, I have no connection, my name means nothing to Monterey Bay Academy, but you say, do you know Virginia and Leslie Goodwin? Yes. The conversation stops then. And, literally 99% of the comments about Leslie is, he was the best teacher I ever had. I loved his stories. Someone told me once how they knew sometimes they loved his stories, but they also knew that if you had a quiz at the end of the period, if you worked the questions right, you could get a story that would make it so there was no longer time to have the quiz that period. And, that might be seen to be, well, he's just not losing it or something to do that, but he knew what he was doing, right? He knew the power of those stories. They were important. Brian and Sharon Gosney, some of you may know who are students at MBA, and Brian's part of our greater extended family. And I reached out to Brian and I said, any thoughts you might want to share about Leslie or anything? And they ended up putting it on the Facebook page for their class or something. And there was one of the class members, Bob Benson, who's a pastor in Michigan. I don't know Bob. But Bob wrote and said, he says, what I remember was that he would trace the hand of God through history. And he would talk about God's pathway through history. And I thought, that's exactly right. Because I remember conversations. And, you think about, his life story. And when he was coming of age, the Nazis were trying to take over Europe and they were bombing his country. And there was really no sure thing that they weren't going to prevail, was there? A lot of doubt. And I remember Leslie saying things like, what if? What do you think would have happened if the Nazis would have prevailed? What do you think would have happened in this in history or that? And he was very interested in that. And it really went back to seeing God's hand, and he would bring that up. I think God, his hand was making this happen, keeping that evil away. Someone else said he had this incredible love of naval history. Leslie had one foot on the ground and the other foot at sea. And it's very true, too. He was always talking about that. You saw those pictures where he always had the Navy ship hat on, loved the uniform and doing that. And he loved what he did as a mentor. And I think one thing you've got to do to be a really good mentor is you got to be able to tell students the truth, but you can't judge. And I've heard that as well from folks. He was never judgmental. I can remember one day, I know Leslie was concerned about some of us and the dangers of rock and roll. And I was spending the summer at a church, Los Gatos in San Jose area. And I had come down on Sunday and let them know I was coming. And Pam was gone someplace, but Paul was there. And Leslie, I know, was worried more about Paul than me. But he sat us down, and we had a little talk about music right there. Now, it was never a judgment. We never heard rock and roll is bad. You guys need to watch this. There was never anything negative about it. It was like, let me show you what I think is a superior kind of music. And we listened to Bach. And I had no problem with Bach. I said, that is great. I love that music too. I think Paul did too. He said, that is great. We love that music. Can we eat now? And we got away from that. The last thing about Leslie, always giving. We heard this in the comments as well. always fundraising for something. The Amazon launch. I remember the Pitcairn Island for a while. We talked about that. And you know what Leslie did, you know, if you and your wife both work for the denomination as teachers, you know, you're not going to be very wealthy in resources, but you will be very wealthy in influence, right? And they used that influence, Leslie especially, always raising fund. And I specifically remember someone brought up the Monterey Bay Academy Church, that. And it wasn't just to have a fancy church at Monterey Bay Academy. It was so the students' life there could be improved through a greater worship experience. That's why they were there. And then I think about Leslie giving to, it came up in the life sketch, these latter years were extremely hard of hearing. And I've thought many times, you know, for a social person, I'm a social person, I get this. If you couldn't speak or hear, it's just got to be really tough, right? And I would think, you know, if that was me and I couldn't hear, or I'd have a tough time interacting in those conversations, boy, I think I'd be tempted to say, I'm not coming to that reunion or that alumni event. Do it without me. Everything I've said has been said. I'm not going to do it. And I would just stay home and be a grump. Or if I went, I'd bring a book, load stuff on my Kindle, sit off in the corner and read and not do anything. But what did Leslie do? The reunions, I've heard he did it at church potlucks. Leslie became kind of the busboy for the room. Can some of you remember that around here? He would go and people would be talking. He knew he couldn't get involved in that conversation. His hearing wasn't good enough in that loud room, but he'd come by, you finished with your plate, Chet? Let me take that for you. And he would do that and clean off all the tables, take it back to the kitchen. It was wonderful. Leslie made a difference in his life. He understood the narrative of life, the stories. He understood asking questions and being inquisitive. He understood being non-judgmental, and he understood giving of himself and focusing on others. What a lesson for us, right? A text came up that really comes to maybe the greatest storyteller, which is Jesus. You know, Jesus never talked about doctrine and details. He told parables and stories. And he told the parable of the talents, and it was referenced earlier, where the man who takes the talents and he takes those and he does something with them, and he comes back to the master, and the master says, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Come and share your master's happiness." It's Matthew 25. A few weeks ago, Patty and I were watching the Ken Burns series on PBS on Benjamin Franklin. Highly recommend it. And I every time I see historical stuff, I think of Leslie. What would Leslie think about this? And it said in there that Benjamin Franklin wrote an epitaph for himself. So an epitaph's made to go on your tombstone, and it actually isn't on his tombstone, but it's an interesting epitaph that I thought I would read to you anyway. The body of B. Franklin, printer, like the cover of an old book, its contents torn out and stripped of its lettering and gilding, lies here. Food for worms. But the work shall not be wholly lost, for it will be as he believed, appear once more in a new and more perfect edition, corrected and amended by the author with a capital A. That's the new edition. I sat with Leslie in this very room at Virginia's service. I said, "How you doing?" And he says, "I'm okay." And he says, "I look forward to the day when I can go to sleep as well and wake up with a new body, can jump and run and skip, and Virginia will be there, Sylvia will be there, all my family and all my friends and former students will be there." That's what he was looking for. And there will be that day. You go to the end of the Bible, the book of Revelation, chapter 21, it says, "He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. I am making everything new." And then the Bible says something that I don't think you see any other place in the Bible. So it makes this strong statement, which is a promise to all of it. And then the next statement, it says, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. This will happen. You better believe it. There will be a time with no more pain, sickness, suffering, death. That's what we want. And at that time, Leslie will be there, and the master will say, well done, good and faithful servant. Come share your master's happiness. Thank you.
I know some of you guys are squinting through your bifocals saying, that's not Jamie Palmer. If it is, school's been really hard on him. Jamie wouldn't have missed this for the world, but he came down here with half a voice, left his other half up in Washington State. So I'm second fiddle today. So great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness, O God, my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions, they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever wilt be. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Summer and winter and springtime and harvest, sun, moon, and stars in their courses above, join with all nature in manifold witness to thy great faithfulness, mercy, and love. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Pardon for sin and a peace that endureth, thine own dear presence to cheer and to guide, strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow, blessings all mine with 10,000 beside. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy Wayne Hooper, who wrote one of the great hymns of the Advent Church in 1962. That hymn is not in our hymnal right now. It used to be 214. But do you have the words up here? You have it up there? Just one verse. Now, he wrote 2 verses, but I don't know the second verse. So we're just going to do the first verse. So would you stand and sing with me, "We Have This Hope"?
We have this hope that burns within our hearts, hope in the coming of the Lord. We have this faith that Christ alone imparts, faith in the promise of His word. We believe the time is here when the nations far and near shall awake and shout and sing, hallelujah, Christ is King. We have this hope that burns within our hearts, hope in the coming of the
Immediately following the service, we'd like to invite you to a meal in our fireside room. We'd like to give the family opportunity to go first and get through the line. That way we have ability to join with them and visit with them as we participate in that meal. Let's bow our heads together for prayer. Lord, it's been good to remember the gift that you've given us in Leslie and the way that he's touched our lives. And so much we've been able to see about you through him. And Lord, now we, with the longing in our heart to be back together with him and with you, and to end the suffering and struggle here on this earth, we look forward to that bright hope that we've been promised, hope in your soon coming. But until then, Lord, we serve you with every breath you give us. We return to you praise. And thank you for this opportunity to have had this life touch ours. In Christ's precious name, amen. Please be seated.